Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin using logarithmic regression. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium, which you can find a link to in the description below, or go to intothecryptoverse.com. That sale is ending today, so you can lock in the lower rate as long as you do not cancel. Let's go ahead and jump in. The logarithmic regression curves for Bitcoin are arguably, in my opinion, right, the best way to define the price action for Bitcoin. And one of the things that we use these for is to really show explosive growth in an asset early on, then it starts to level off a bit as time goes on. It doesn't mean you can't make a lot of money. It just means that the moves aren't quite as spectacular as they once were. And what you notice is that the price of Bitcoin, obviously there's a lot of subjectivity to market cycles, but the price of Bitcoin tends to bottom out in the lower regression band, and it tends to get too extended when we go to the upper regression band. Okay, so the lower one, that's when everyone says it's going down here, and then it goes back the other way. When we're up here, everyone says it's going to keep going higher, and then it ultimately goes back the other way. Same thing over here, right? It goes back the other way, and then once you get to the top, it goes back the other way. Now, what's interesting this cycle so far is we have flirted with the lower bound of the regression line, but we actually haven't gone in it. I mean, there's no guarantees we're going to go in it for a while, but what you'll notice is that once we were approaching it, obviously the market was getting really heated back in early 2021, and we warned about it many times. What's interesting is, since then we started to come down, and then rather than go down to the bottom, we actually went back up a little bit. Not to the regression band, but we still have just been sort of sitting in no man's land, right? I mean, you could argue that we're just sitting in no man's land right now. And really, the longer we sit in no man's land, you could argue the better, because it gives the lower bound more time to move higher, and it gives the upper bound more time to move higher. If you're curious what the lower bound regression band is, which is fit to quote unquote non-bubble data, okay, so this is the fair value fit to non-bubble data. The fair value of Bitcoin fit to non-bubble data is now at 21.3K. All right, that's just fit to non-bubble data. 21.3K. That's still moving higher. And what's interesting is that the upper bound of our regression line is now above the summer low. Okay, so that's currently sitting at around 31.5K, the upper bound of the lower regression line. Now, the upper bound is currently ranging from around 89.8K up to approximately 132.9K. So a pretty big range there. But I think the argument is that, in general, when you're navigating Bitcoin, whenever we are in the bottom band, it tends to be a really great time to buy, right? We don't know when we're going to go there exactly, but whenever it happens, it tends to be a really great time to buy. When we're in the upper band, even when we're just flirting with it, it tends to be a good time to start taking profits, okay? If history is any indication, right? Doesn't mean that, if you had sold back in 2017, maybe you would have sold some at 14K. It still went to 20K, but if you had just sort of DCA'd out some, even if you sold some at 14K, I mean, you still would have been pretty happy about that all the way back over here. In the same way in 2021, if you started selling a little bit at 58 and then 60 and 61, for a little while when it went to 64, you may have been worried, but then ultimately we came all the way back down to around 29K. And again, we're sort of just in no man's land right now. We are closer to the bottom than we are to the top. In fact, if Bitcoin were to drop from the current prices, we're currently sitting around $40,000. If we were to drop another 20% or so, then we would in fact be at the lower bound logarithmic regression channel. And it's something important to keep in mind, because as we continue to navigate the cryptoverse, I do think these logarithmic regression lines will become increasingly important. And there could be an argument made that we could refit this to include what happened in early 2021, to include it on in the fit, and perhaps we'll do that at some point. But for right now, I think that just kind of understanding where we are, what is the risk involved, you could argue we're just sitting in no man's land, right? I mean, and you could have said the same thing back in July, and we did say the same thing back in July, and we broke to the upside, right? We'll say the same thing now. We're still sitting in no man's land. There isn't really any clear direction that we have to go. Obviously, there is the bearish thesis. We followed that many times. There's also the bullish thesis as well. But the downside risk is this, right? And the upside potential is that. So when I think about that and I see price predictions of say 300K back in 2021 and whatnot, the logarithmic regression band certainly did allow for it, and they won't allow for it for quite some time. Again, even the upper bound on the logarithmic regression channel is around 133K. It's going to take a long time for us to get to that 300K threshold that a lot of people like to talk about. So I would argue that, there are things that are realistic, there are things that are unrealistic to the upside and the downside. Okay, so, when people say that Bitcoin's going to go back to 4K, I really don't believe that. I mean, you're talking about the price of Bitcoin coming back down here, which doesn't make sense to me. Obviously, that was possible once upon a time, but our argument is that the fair value increases with time, and therefore a 4K is highly unlikely going to happen. In the same manner, we're likely not going to 500K in 2022 either. So you need to understand what will sort of cap the price of Bitcoin in the short term to the upside and the downside. And I think one thing you can do is use logarithmic regression lines. Remember, back in early 2021, everyone and their moms were calling for 300K. Okay, so there's going to be a time in the future whenever we break six figures that a lot of people are going to be calling for 300K, 400K again, and it's going to depend on when it happens, if it's actually possible. Okay, because it's going to take, we're certainly not going to see a 300K appear on the logarithmic regression channel in 2022. So I think the argument is that we simply need more time than that. Okay, so you can get access to these trading view indicators. They're also on the website intothecryptoverse.com. The sale ends today, so you can lock in the lower rate. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.